Lesson 8, Sufism. Sufism is a term applied to the philosophical and religious system of a large body of mystics sheltered beneath the wing of the Mohammedan religion, to which they owe temporal allegiance, but among whom they are a strange people. Although the Sufis are to be found in Turkey, Arabia, Egypt, and principally in Persia, India, not knowing them at all except through the chance visit of one of their number, still Sufism is a direct offshoot of the Hindu philosophy, in its Vedantic interpretation and Bhakti manifestations, and justice requires that we should include it in our consideration of the philosophies and religions of India. Just as Buddhism, which is almost extinct in India, outside of the far northern regions and in Burma and surrounding places, its principal following being in the foreign lands, is still considered as a Hindu teaching because of its origin in India, so do we attribute Sufism to India, although her borders enclose but few Sufis, and their great following is in Persia, and other Mohammedan lands. Without India there would be no Sufism. Without the Hindu teachings the Sufis would be orthodox Mohammedans. And, as you consider, herein, the doctrines of the Sufi, you will agree with us that their origin must be found in the Vedanta and Bhakti Yoga of India. They tell their own tale. The word Sufi is derived from the Persian word suf, derived from the Arabic, meaning wool, the connection being evident when it is remembered that the early Sufis discarded their former costly robes of silk and costly materials, and adopted a plain garb of coarse undyed wool, the plainest and cheapest material in the land, corresponding to the cheap cotton robe in which the Hindu ascetic wraps himself. Consequently these men became known as wool wearers, and from the term suf, meaning wool, the words Sufi and Sufism arose. It is difficult to determine the date of the origin of Sufism, in absence of historical data, and we are compelled to fall back upon the legends for information and clues. The Sufis themselves hold that it is thousands of years old, the saying being that the seed of Sufism was sown in the time of Adam, germinated in the time of Noah, budded in the time of Abraham, began to develop in the time of Jesus, and produced pure wine in the time of Muhammad. But this saying is in line with other claims common among the Mohammedans who indulge in characteristic flowery speech, and the best authorities believe that Sufism had its rise in the early centuries of the Christian era. One of the first recorded mentions of the word Sufism is in connection with one Abu Hashim, who lived and taught about 750 AD, while about a half-century later the sect sprang into prominence in Persia, Abul Said Abul-Khair, Talnan al-Misri, and other leaders spreading its teachings vigorously. Some of the best authorities trace it back to the very time of Muhammad himself, claiming there is historical evidence to prove that Ali, the favorite disciple of the Prophet, was a Sufi and really founded the sect in an inner circle of the new religion. But there are numerous legendary fragments tending to prove that the teachings of Sufism existed in the lands conquered by Muhammad, long before his advent, having been taught there by wandering Vedantists from India, and which secret teachings were adopted by those of Muhammad's followers who were mystically inclined, and who were not willing to part with their favorite philosophy in spite of their adherence to the doctrines of the new prophet. At any rate, it may be said safely that Muhammad had no share in keeping alive the germ of mysticism, for he was opposed to it, and taught positively against it. While there are many apparent points of difference between the Sufi doctrines, as now taught, and the doctrines of the Vedanta, still one familiar with both may see many points of resemblance, and easily may reconcile the points of divergence. Both hold to the one reality which they declare is all that is, although the Vedanta conception is more metaphysical and abstract in its conception of that without attributes and qualities, while to the Sufis the one is God, warm, personal, and living. But this is merely a difference in the temperament, training and environment of the two races, the Hindu and the Persian, and still more the influence of the particular form of yoga manifested by the two schools. The Vedantists prefer the yoga of wisdom, Jnana Yoga, while the Sufis adhere tenaciously and earnestly to the yoga of love, Bhakti Yoga. And there is but little difference in the teachings of the Hindu Bhakti Yoga, and the Persian Sufi. To both love of God is the best path of attainment, and the moksha or nirvana of the Hindu is almost identical with the union with God of the Sufi. And as the Hindu yogi has his state of samadhi, or ecstasy of spiritual consciousness, so has the Sufi his state of ecstasy of the sight of the beloved, both being identical in nature, and both being forms of the worldwide state of illumination of the mystics. Just as the yogis have their teachers known as gurus, so have the Sufis their teachers known as Pirs, the same reverence being shown in both cases, and the same methods of initiating the neophytes into the esoteric mysteries being observed. Some authorities have pointed out correspondences between the Neoplatonists and the Sufis, and have held that the latter owed their teachings to the former. But when it is remembered that the Neoplatonists themselves obtained their germ thoughts from the Hindus, it is not to be wondered that resemblances may be traced between the Grecian followers, and the Persian followers, of the same root teachings. Undoubtedly later Sufism has been influenced by thought from many sources, but it shows its direct descent from the Hindus too plainly to admit of doubt. The great Sufi teachers lived in the early days of the Mohammedan era. The authorities gave the names of Tanun, AD 859, Siri Sagvate, AD 867, Junaid, AD 910, Al-Nalaj, AD 980, Ghazali, AD 1111, Jalaluddin Rumi, AD 1273, as being the great teachers of their times, and among the great poets who have versed the Sufi teachings under the familiar disguises should be mentioned Omar Khayyam, Nizami, Fariduddin Utter Sadi, Shamsi Hafiz, and Va'uri Jamian Hanafi. Sufism flourished under the teachings of the early sages and poets, but about the 16th century it began to yield to the overwhelming influence of the Orthodox Mohammedan Church, and a decline set in, from which the sect never has entirely recovered. But, although the sect suffered this reverse in point of numbers and popularity, it has recently experienced a new life, not drawing to itself great numbers, but in the sense of attracting to it many Orientals of education and culture, to whom its mysticism proved congenial. For about the last 50 years it has been making quite a headway among the cultured Persians and Turks, and among a few in Egypt and Arabia, the work, however, being conducted in secret and being in the nature of secret society work rather than religious ceremony or worship. A few Europeans and Americans have been attracted to the sect, particularly those who have been able to read between the lines of Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat, seeing the mysticism appearing behind the apparently materialistic expressions as interpreted by Fitzgerald, which interpretation is generally held to contain more of Fitzgerald's expression than Omar's conceptions, but still, the mystic teaching may be discerned when one has the key, as we shall see presently. In Persia, Egypt, Arabia, and Turkey, the word Sufi has been as much abused as has the word yogi in India. Both words originally meant wise men and spiritual teachers, whereas in India the term yogi has been applied by Westerners and some Hindus, to the hearts of ignorant fakirs who are on a very low plane of mentality and spirituality as well as of social standing, while the term Sufi has been applied to a similar class of mendicant beggars, dervishes, fanatics, and wonder workers, infesting the Mohammedan lands. There is a vast difference between a Hindu fakir, and a real yogi, and there is the same vast difference between a Persian, Egyptian, Arabian, or Turkish fakir or dervish, and a true Sufi. As an old Sufi writer once said, "He who forsakes the world is a Sufi, he whom the world forsakes is a mendicant." So in considering the Sufis, we must ask you to distinguish between the true and the false, just as we once asked you to do in the case of the yogis, before you were familiar with the subject. Passing on to the philosophy of the Sufis, we would say that the original teachings did not go deeply into metaphysics or philosophical subtleties, but contented themselves with affirming the oneness of reality, the omnipresence, and immanentialness and oneness, of God, and the fact that He might be reached by love and devotion. The rest of the doctrine was left to be developed as the sect grew and the philosophical interest developed. Briefly, the teaching was that God was the supreme good, that He was the source of all things, that He was self-existent, and uncreated, that the universe was created by a reflection from, or emanation from God's own being, that, therefore, He was immanent in, and permeated all nature, that matter was but an appearance, being temporary and changing, and in the nature of an illusory screen whereupon God could manifest His universe, that by ecstasy and contemplation and meditation upon this all good, the soul could and would rise to its source and be merged therein at the last, that in the return to the source the all good man must pass through many incarnations, rising ever higher and higher. This was the essence of the teachings, and the essence of that essence was that God was within man, that man contained the divine spark within his inner nature, and that inner divinity, or spirit, was the real self. Surely this was closely akin to the Vedanta, even to its inner teachings. And, we feel sure, that after reading the above paragraph, every one of our yogi students may be able to recognize the Sufi as his brother. There are many interesting legends connected with the realization of the doctrine by the early Sufis, and the natural extremes to which their new thought carried them, and the opposition the idea aroused among the people who had always considered God to be somebody away off. A few of these instances may interest you, so we will relate them. One of the most celebrated of the early Sufis was a woman, by name Rabia al-Adawiyya, also known as Rabia Abazra. One day Rabia was asked if she hated the devil, of the Orthodox Mohammedan Church, of course, and she replied, "No, not at all. My love for God occupies all my mind, all my time, so that I have neither time nor room to hate anything, even the devil." When asked why she did not marry, she replied, "I am already wedded to my Lord by the bonds of divine wedlock. I am not free, for am I not my Lord's spouse, and must I not be faithful to him?" Rabia exerted a great influence on the early Sufi sect, until the time of her death in Jerusalem, in AD 753. Of another one of the old Sufi saints or sages, named Bayezid, the following is told. One day the old sage passed into an ecstatic condition, in which he attained cosmic consciousness, union with God, ecstasy, samadhi, illumination, or by whatever name men chose to call that wonderful state. Awakening therefrom, and still under the spell of his vision of oneness, he cried aloud to his disciples, "Lo, I myself am God Almighty. There is none other God beside me." His disciples were horrified, and when their master had fully recovered, they told him of the blasphemy he had uttered. Bayezid replied, "Oh, woe is me! If I blaspheme again, straightway slay me." And his disciples sharpened their knives for their holy task, for so they considered it. Once more the master passed into samadhi, and cried aloud, "Within my robe there is none but God, wherefore seek you him or heaven or earth?" The disciples, overcome with horror, and in accordance with the master's orders, straightway plunged their blades into his body. But, the legend concludes, their knives were turned back upon their own bodies, and they perished, for they had raised their hands upon the divine spirit within the master which inspired the speech. And then Bayezid explained to the remaining disciples that his personality had vanished during his ecstasy, and he saw that his form was but a mirror faintly reflecting the form of God, and that when the disciples wished to strike him with their knives, they saw only the mirror reflecting their own faces, not seeing God, and Bayezid having vanished, and so their knives struck themselves. Many of the early Sufis fell into the same error that has carried away so many of the modern Western students of advanced metaphysics, that supreme foolishness which would call the reflection by the name of that which causes it and which voices itself in the strident, raucous cry of, "I am God." We find instances of this throughout many of the early records of the sect, particularly as the doctrine of the indwelling spirit was argued out to its extreme possibilities, and the difference between the reality and the reflection faded away, and in the Sufi terminology, the beloved and the lover are known to be one. One Mansur al-Hallaj became renowned by his claims that "I am God," which nearly caused a schism in the sect. In this teaching he was rivaled by one Akbar, who modestly refrained from sounding his own godship, but who inspired his followers to do so. One of his poet disciples singing enthusiastically, "See Akbar, and you see God." Al-Hallaj at one time was crucified by the Orthodox Mohammedans, remaining suffering on the cross for 4 days, on both sides of the Tigris River. He bore his sufferings with noble courage, saying, "From his own cup he bade me sup, for such is hospitality, and I am receiving only what is mine, for by God, I never distinguished for a moment between pain and pleasure." Also uttering one of his characteristic sayings, "The way to God is but 2 steps. One step out of this world, and one step out of the next world, and lo, you are there with God." The legends have it that he did not die on the cross, but was released after the 4 days' crucifixion and lived for 10 years more, being finally stoned to death, the legend being that, expiring, he wrote with his finger, with his own blood, on the stones, the words, "I am God." But these are instances of the extreme of the thought, and the body of the Sufis did not hold to these claims, but instead, regarded every man's soul as a mirror in which was reflected the image of God, and which image constituted the spirit with each man, and which was his true self. There is a great difference between the conception of the indwelling spirit, the immanent God, and that of the I am God teachers. One of the most confusing points about the Sufi teachings, to the Western mind, is the symbology of the writers, and the corresponding fact that many of their sacred writings seem to be mere voluptuous and bacchanalian rhapsodies, filled with references to the grape, or the vine, or the red wine, and wine cup, as well as praises of the beloved damsel, the beloved, the embrace of love, the nuptial couch, and much other imagery which to the Western mind is connected with subjects far removed from religion and devotion. But when one has the key, and recognizes, as does the Persian, that in these verses there is to be seen two separate meanings, besides the five mystical meanings, which are claimed for all mystic poetry, there may be an understanding. The cause of this peculiar style lies in the fact that outside of the natural exuberant imagery of the Oriental mind, which the West finds difficult to understand, there always has been the necessity of the Sufi veiling his inner meaning beneath the form of current poetical subjects. Surrounded on all sides by the hordes of ignorant, bigoted, fanatical Orthodox Mohammedans, the Sufi has been compelled to take refuge in this peculiar symbology. To the Persian, and particularly to the Sufi mystic, there must always be a veil before the outer and vulgar meaning of the verses, which veil must be pulled aside by the elect before they may see the beauties which lie behind the covering. The vulgar see nothing but the painted veil with its gross, sensual figures appearing thereon, which veil is boldly pulled aside by those who understand, and who would see the truth behind the veil. This symbolism is based upon the ecstasy of the recognition of the God within the presence of the indwelling spirit, and accordingly, the embrace means the ecstasy of the conscious union with divinity, the wedding, the entrance into the knowledge, the wine, the Sufi mystical teachings, the vine and the grape, the source of the wine. Hence Sufism, the tavern, the temple or Sufi secret lodge of instruction. The beloved is the symbol for the all-good, or God, and the lover is always the Sufi gazing at his beloved. The term the beloved damsel is often used as a cloak for the divine one, in the sense of being the object of the ardent love of the lover, or Sufi, and the terms the red rose, which is beloved by the nightingale, are used in the same sense of beloved and the lover. Many Western writers have considered this symbology far-fetched, and have preferred to read nothing but sensualism and bacchanalian rioting in the verse of the inspired poets of Persia. But the Sufis know better, and a careful reading will disclose the hidden meaning, will pull aside the veil. For instance, read the apparently riotous verses of the Rubaiyat, with the above interpretation, and see if it does not agree with the inner teachings, and David's lips are locked but in divine high-piping pihvi, with a wine, 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 red wine. The nightingale cries to the rose, that sallow cheek of hers, tea incarnadine, a book of verses underneath the bough, a jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou beside me singing in the wilderness. Oh, wilderness were paradise now. You know, my friends, with what a brave carouse I made a second marriage in my house, divorced old barren reason from my bed, and took the daughter of the vine to spouse. And lately, by the tavern door agape, came shining through the dusk an angel shape bearing a vessel on his shoulder, and he bid me taste of it, and 'twas the grape that can with logic absolute the 72 jarring sects confute, the sovereign alchemist that in a trice life's leaden metal into gold transmute. And much as wine has played the infidel, and robbed me of my robe of honor, well I wonder often what the vintners buy one half so precious as the stuff they sell. Before the phantom of false morning died, methought a voice within the tavern cried, when all the temple is prepared within, why nods the drowsy worshipper outside? Come, fill the cup, and in the fire of spring your winter garment of repentance fling. The bird of time has but a little way to flutter, and the bird is on the wing. So much for old Omar and his wine, and tavern, and spouse, and roses. How different it all seems when one has the key. How many of us can voice with him his praise of the wine which intoxicates the soul with a bliss ineffable? How much the old Sufi, Omar, resembles Spinoza, whom people have called the God-intoxicated philosopher. How much is the Sufi like the ecstatic Hindu Bhakti yogi, filled with the wine of spirit, who fills the air with his rapturous cries of, "Oh, my beloved one." You who think that this is a mere coincidence, and that old Omar is still immaterialistic, cynical, skeptical, old wine bibber and libertine Epicurean, wait a while, until you learn the secret of Omar. The Sufi philosophy is very simple. There is very little more to it than the fundamental principles we have already stated. The Sufis do not concern themselves with hair-splitting metaphysical discussions regarding the how phase of the universe enough for them to know that God is, and that His reflection and image is in themselves. They hold that in this realization there is a knowing of that, which when once known causes all to be known. They believe in reincarnation, and have some vague teachings regarding states of rest, in heavens and hells, between incarnations, but some of the advanced Sufis pay but little attention to these teachings, deeming them at the best but discussions of inferior phases of existence but little above or below the earthly life, holding that there is but one life looking forward to union with God. Some of these advanced thinkers, in their writings and verses, speak of the highest heavens of their brethren as those petty villages, filled with hovels, called heavens, at which we will tarry not, but shall hasten unto the mansion of our beloved one, wherein our wedding feast is awaiting us, and our nuptial couches spread with the finest silks and most costly adornments. Wherefore shall we dally with the petty villages and the hovel-like resting places? And again, what terror shall the lowest hell have for him who knows that eventually, yea, even at the end of many a tilde broken bar-ons, he shall be clasped in his beloved's arms? 'Tis but a foul nightmare fantasy, and awakening the lover shall find his beloved gazing longing into his eyes. Surely, heaven can hold no reward, nor hell any punishment, for souls like these. The general philosophy may be summed up as follows: God is pure being, the necessarily existent, Wajibul Wujud, the absolute good, Kabramaz, the absolute beautiful. In his aspect of the absolute beautiful, he desired to witness himself in reflection, wished to realize his own beautiful nature and being, and so caused his divine image to fall on the mirror of not reality, Adam. The reflection thus caused being the cause of the phenomenal world, or appearance of being, Imkan, which reveals the divine image of the Creator but does not partake of his substantial being, and which is, on the contrary, in truth but a fantasy and an illusion. Man is the eye of the phenomenal world. When he is able to see God as the one and only reality behind the phenomenal universe of appearances, and to see the illusory nature of the latter, then he is able to escape from the bondage of the shadow world, the phantasmagoria of the world, and attain absorption in the divine, Phanafila. By the study of the mystic teachings, Shariat, and the following of the mystic path, Tariqat, the mystic student and seeker of truth arrives at his goal, and sees and realizes the truth. Hakikat, evil is held to be but a negation of good, and therefore has no real being. There is no absolute evil in the universe, evil is but relative, says the old Sufi mystic Jalaluddin Rumi. There is little or no doctrine or dogma in Sufism. It is taken up with statement of the existence of the Lord, and His abiding spirit within the soul, and with instruction whereby one may plant his feet firmly on the path that leadeth to paradise. The whole aim is toward union with God, in which there are two stages, viz., 1. The recognition of the union in consciousness, during earth life, by means of spiritual consciousness, ecstasy, or illumination, and, 2. The final and complete union with God, in which the individual spirit returns to the bosom of the great ocean of spirit and loses itself in the one, or as the Buddhists put it, the dewdrop slides into the shining sea. The first stage is akin to the Hindu Samadhi, the higher phase is approaching nirvana, while the second stage is akin to the Buddhist parinirvana, or complete absorption. There are but two truths known to the Sufi: 1, the one, and 2, the way to the one. The first is called Ahad, the second Tariqat. The first truth, Ahad, is that which we have stated, that is, that there is naught but God in reality, that all is delusion and illusion, untruth, a phantasmagoric puppet show, operated by the master of the show. So long as it pleases his fancy to allow it to remain in his view, God made the universe as a passing show, because I was a hidden treasure, and I wished to be known, so I created the universe that I might be known, and know that I am known. God is not only absolute being, but also absolute truth, absolute love, and absolute beauty. The second truth, Tariqat, or the way to the one, is akin to the Hindu teachings on the subject. Instructed by his teacher, or guru, the disciple ascends the steps of the ladder of God, discarding his material ideas, desires, tastes and attachments, freeing himself from illusion, regenerating himself anew, and sanctifying himself by devotion, contemplation, meditation, and right thinking and right living. There are many mystic practices familiar to Hindu, ancient Greece, and some of the modern Western cults and mystic orders. Dances there are, rhythmic and graceful motions accompanied by chants. Silences there are also, in which the soul may enjoy mystic communion with higher planes of being. Ecstatic states are frequent, and cosmic consciousness frequent among the higher students. The Sufis hold that man is miniature God, in relation to his body, which is his miniature universe. Hence the statement of the authorities that Sufism teaches that man is both, and at the same time, a microtheos, and a microcosmos. They hold that there are 5 planes of being, namely, 1. The absolute invisible, 2. The relatively invisible, 3. The plane of similitudes, 4. The plane of visibility, and 5. The plane of below visibility. These planes are sometimes roughly classified as the 3 planes, styled, respectively, the invisible, the intermediate, and the visible. The uneducated and simple followers after the advanced teachers, speak of but 2 planes, the visible and the invisible, respectively, so that there seems to be an esoteric as well as an exoteric doctrine concerning these planes. But, this is not all. The most advanced speak of a plane vastly higher than even the absolute invisible, which they speak of as above words or thought, arid, which one authority has compared to Dante's spaceless empyrean. The spirit, or as some call it the soul, is of course conceived of as immortal and pre-existent, in the sense that before it started on its round of incarnations it was in the bosom of God. It is held to retain a memory of its former blissful state, and the natural appreciation for beauty is held to be due to a faint recollection of the beauty of the spiritual existence in the one. The universe, as we have said, was conceived of as a panoramic phantasmagoria, the scenes and actors constantly changing, making their appearance, playing their part, and passing off the scene. Man's spirit was an emanation of God, and his body was but an incidental covering, created for the purposes of the show world, and therefore of but little value except as a part of the play. Fate and destiny are the directions of the divine stage manager, the divine purpose and will, which may not be avoided or disobeyed. But the spirit was always homesick, repining, and longing to be reunited with its beloved. As Avicenna, the Sufi poet, hath sung in his great poem on the morning soul, seeking its beloved, lo, it was hurled amidst the signposts and ruined abodes of this blessed world. It weeps, when it thinks of its home and the peace it possessed, with tears welling forth from its eyes without pausing or rest, and with plaintive mourning it broodeth like one bereft o'er such trace of its home as the fourfold winds have left. Strictly speaking then, Sufism is the philosophy of oneness of all godness, in the strictest sense of the word. And Sufism, as a religion, is the religion of the love of God, in the strictest sense of the term. Even the most radical and advanced Vedantist can conceive of no more absolute godness than the Sufi, and even the love-stricken Bhakti Yogi of India can claim no more divine lovesickness than the Sufi. And therefore Sufism is love of God in its most active form. Therefore let us consider this love of God and the Sufi expression of it, in verse and action, and in connection with the Hindu Bhakti Yoga. It is difficult for the Western mind to understand the Oriental conception and expression of the love of God, of which we find many references in the Hindu and Persian poems, hymns, and epics. The Western mind recognizes a quiet and repressed expression of the love of the creature toward the Creator, which expression seldom goes beyond a quiet earnest expression of the love of the child toward the Father. In some cases the expression of love toward the Christ and Savior is expressed with rather more fervor and human feeling, and terms such as the beloved are not uncommon in this connection. Some Western religious writers have even hinted, in poetical form, of the relationship of the Creator and creature as the love of the mother for the babe, etc., but even such instances are rare. It is true that under the excitement, ardor and fervor of the old-time revivals, we often heard ecstatic and passionate expressions of love of God, which, at times, faintly approach the Oriental form of expression, but even this extreme voicing of the feeling seems to be dying out. But in the Eastern lands it is quite different. The warm, poetical natures of the people express themselves in the use of the most ardent terms of endearment addressed to deity, and, to the Western mind, The most extravagant forms of expression of the divine relationship are freely indulged in. The Bhakti yogis of India and the majority of the followers of the religious creeds profess this form of yoga make the expression of this love of God one of their principal religious ceremonies and duties. On all sides are heard the voices of the faithful raised in prayers and praise of deity, in which the most endearing terms are used. It is quite frequent for the Hindu Krishna Vaishnava Bhakti to address his Lord as beloved darling sweetheart precious one light of my heart beautiful one being of rapturous bliss, etc., etc. Some who find a nearness in considering the Lord in the aspect of mother love, not uncommon in Eastern countries, are heard addressing prayers to my blessed Mother Divine, with references to the divine breasts which have ever suckled the infant, and so on. Instances are common in which Hindu women, whose conception of the greatest love was that of the mother love toward the child, are found in rapturous devotion before the picture of the infant Krishna, addressing the deity as O my beloved baby my darling infant thou whom I suckle at my breast forever and always, etc., etc. And Western travelers in India, who have had some of the religious prayers and ecstatic addresses translated for them, are shocked to hear the terms of ardent endearment, usually applied in cases of intense love between man and woman, being used in addressing the deity. To the Oriental, God is not only a father, but is also a mother, a brother, a sister, a child, a friend, a husband, a wife, a sweetheart, a lover. In fact, to him the Lord answers every worthy and pure human cry for love and affection, and responds to it by a return of the love to him. Every human love relation, of a pure kind, has its transcendental counterpart and pattern in the divine, and he feels no hesitancy in calling upon his Lord giving and asking love. In the West, this idea is confined to religious poetry, and even there is repressed and merely hinted at, but in the East it is expressed freely and without restraint. And, the Western student of Oriental religions must acquaint himself with this fact, else he will fail utterly in his reading of the Oriental forms of thought and religious expression. Particularly is the above true of the Persian Sufi poets. Even more ardent and unrestrained than the Hindu Bhaktis, the Persian Sufis express their love for the One in poems in which, following the universal custom of their land and cult, there is always the inner and hidden meaning, so that behind the passionate poem to the beloved damsel, there appears the Sufi endearment of the One. Just as behind the wine of Omar Khayyam, appears the Sufi doctrines and thought, so in the other Persian poets the love of the One appears behind the love of the bright-eyed damsel, and the rose garden, and the nightingale and rose of the erotic Persian love song. Many Western writers doubt this, and laugh at the attempt to read divine ecstasy between the lines of some burning love stanzas of the Persian poets, but all who have studied Persian literature, and Persian Sufi philosophy and religion, at the same time, agree upon the facts of the case, as above stated. Misunderstood, the Sufi poems must seem indeed like a blasphemous mingling of sensuality and religion, so that one can scarcely blame writers like the Reverend W. R. Inge, who states that the Sufis, or Mohammedan mystics, use erotic language very freely and appear like true Asiatics, to have attempted to give a sacramental or symbolic character to the indulgence of their passions. The Reverend Inge also accuses the Sufis of being most shocking and blasphemous, but his idea of shocking blasphemy may be understood when it is remembered that he blames Emerson with playing with pantheistic mysticism of the Oriental type, and accuses him of resembling the Persian Sufis in some respects. He merely lacked the crystal spectacles of understanding, when he read the Persian poems, that is all. Let us quote you from some of these shocking and blasphemous erotic Persian poets. These God-drunken souls, using the poetical imagery of their land to express that which was the love of the all-good all-beautiful, to them. The following lines are from the poems of Jalaluddin Rumi, one of the greatest of the Sufi poets. Our journey is to the rose garden of union. Come, come, thou art the soul so dear, revolving. Come, come, thou art the cedar spear, revolving. Oh, come, the well of light up bubbling springs and morning stars exalt, in gladness sheer, revolving. I am silent. Speak thou, O soul of soul, from desire of whose face every atom grew articulate. Give my heart babe milk, relieve us from its weeping, O thou that helpest, every moment 100 helpless like me. Thy heart's home, first to last, is thy city of union, How long wilt thou keep in exile this heart forlorn? The Prince of the Fair goes proudly forth to the chase at morning. May our hearts fall a prey to the arrow of his glance. From his eye what messages are passing continually to mine? May my eyes be gladdened and filled with intoxication by his message. My body is like the moon which is melting for love. My heart likes you resolute, may its strings be broken. Look not on the moon's waning nor on Zuri's broken state. Behold the sweetness of his affection, may it wax 1,000-fold. What a bride is in the soul! By the reflection of her face may the world be freshened and colored like the faces of the newly married. Eternal life, methinks, is the time of union, because time, for me, hath no place there. Life is the vessels, union the clear draught in them. Without thee what does the pain of the vessels avail me? Show me thy face, for I desire the orchard and the rose garden. Ope thy lips, for I desire sugar in plenty. O sun, show forth thy face from the veil of cloud, for I desire that radiant glowing countenance. The soul's love moved are circling on, like streams to their great ocean king. Thou art the sun of all men's thoughts, thy kisses are the flowers of spring. The dawn is pale from yearning love, the moon in tears is sorrowing. Thou art the rose, and deep for thee, in sighs, the nightingales still sing. I, all in all becoming, now clear see God in all, and up from union yearning, takes flight the cry of love. On that his wedding night, in the presence of his bride, his pure soul attained to kiss her hands. Love and mistress are both veiled and hidden. Impute it not a fault if I call him a bride. The sect of lovers is distinct from all others. Lovers have a religion and a faith of their own. Though the ruby has no stamp, what matters it? Love is fearless in the midst of the sea of fear. The love of the soul is for life and living one, because its origin is the soul not bound to place. Eternal life is gained by utter abandonment of one's own life. When God appears to his ardent lover, the lover is absorbed in him, and not so much as a hair of the lover remains. True lovers are as shadows, and when the sun shines in glory the shadows vanish away. He is a true lover to God, to whom God says, I am thine, and thou art mine. When one has attained union with God he has no need of intermediaries. Earthly forms are only shadows of the Sun of Truth, a cradle for babes, but too small to hold those who have grown to spiritual manhood. By thy grace I keep fixed on eternity my amorous gaze. The poet from whose verses we have above made a few quotations, when quite a young man, once advised singing and dancing at the funeral of a friend. When remonstrated with by the horror-stricken and indignant mourners, he replied, when the human spirit, after years of confinement in the cage and dungeon of the body, is at length set free, and wings its flight to the source whence it came, is not this an occasion for rejoicing, thanks, and dancing? Jami, another Sufi poet, hath sung of the divine love of the divine gaze, till gazing out of gazing, grew to being her eye gaze upon, she and I no more, but in one undivided being blended. All that is not one must ever suffer with the wound of absence, and whoever in love's city enters, finds but room for one, and but in oneness, union. Omar Khayyam, whose Rubaiyat is well known in the West by reason of the popularity of Fitzgerald's translation, had much to say of love, the beloved and the lover, but beyond the few verses quoted by us in the first part of the lesson, Fitzgerald gives us but few touching upon this subject, leaving the balance untranslated and unused, seemingly preferring to give prominence to those using the figurative symbols of the wine. But still Fitzgerald included many showing that old Omar understood the doctrine, and taught the philosophy. The following quotations will show this: some for the glories of this world and some sigh for the Prophet's paradise to come. Ah, take the cash, and let the credit go, nor heed the rumble of a distant drum. In the above quatrain Omar classed like the earthly glory and the heavenly glory, both being impermanent. He bids hold fast to the realization of the oneness, heeding not the future planes, or states, which are merely another form of impermanence, into this universe, and a why not knowing nor a whence, like water willy-nilly glowing and out of it, as wind along the waste, I know not a whither, willy-nilly blowing. What, without asking, hither hurried a whence? And, without asking, a whither hurried hence? Oh, many a cup of this forbidden wine must drown the memory of that insolence. Then of the thee in me who works behind the veil, I lifted up my hands to find a lamp amid the darkness, and I heard, as from without, the me within thee blind. And then the tulip for her morning sup of heavenly vintage from the soil looks up, Do you devoutly do the like, till heaven to earth invert you like an empty cup? Perplexed no more with human or divine, tomorrow's tangle to the winds resign, and lose your fingers in the tresses of the cypress slender minister of wine. And if the wine you drink, the lip you press, and in what all begins and ends in yes, think then you are today what yesterday you were, tomorrow you shall not be less. So when the angel of the darker drink at last shall find you by the river brink, and, offering his cup, invite your soul forth to your lips to quaff, you shall not shrink. And fear not lest existence closing your account, and mine, should know the like no more. The eternal sake from that bowl has poured millions of bubbles like us, and will pour, whose secret presence, through creation's veins running quicksilver like, eludes your painstaking all shapes from ma to ma, and they change and perish all, but he remains a moment guest, then back behind the folders of darkness round the drama rolled, which, for the pastime of eternity, he doth himself contrive, enact. Behold, we are no other than a moving row of magic shadow shapes that come and go round with the sun illumined lantern held in midnight by the master of the show, but helpless pieces of the game he plays upon his checkerboard of nights and days, hither and thither moves, and checks, and slays, and one by one back in the closet lays. The ball no question makes of eyes and nose, but here or there as strikes the player goes, and he that tossed you down into the field, he knows about it all, he knows. And this I know, whether the one true light kindle to love, or wrath consume me quite, one flash of it within the tavern caught better than in the temple lost outright. This is a glimpse of old Omar, with his love and sorrow so closely intermingled, his trust and his belief in fate twin-like sharing his soul, his distrust of the speculations of the philosophers causing him to ever seek the wine of the Sufi teachings which lead to goat intoxication. Life to him was but the game he plays upon the checkerboard of nights and days, the release coming only from the grape. And this, then, is a glimpse into the flower-scented land of Persian Sufism. We trust that the flowers that we have plucked from its rose garden will not have withered by the time they reach you, and we trust that the thorn on the stem may not prevent your seeing the beauty of the flower, nor the distance prevent your hearing the thrill of the nightingale. We shall not attempt to point out wherein the Sufi teachings agree with those of the inner teachings of the Yogi philosophy, nor wherein they disagree. You who have studied both should be able to make the comparison without trouble, to point out the place at which Sufism emerges from the common thought branch, and also the direction in which it grows away from our own stem of truth. You should be able to analyze the Sufi conception, separating its glorious perception of the ever-effulgent One, and its expression of love for Him, from the fatal touch of pessimism, fatalism, and belief in the show world in which all is but scenery moved by and puppets on strings pulled by the master of the show. Instead, you should be able to see the universe as an ever-evolving manifestation of the one life, under the control of the one will, and under the direction of the one mind, and animated by the one spirit, moving on to greater and greater heights and expression, in accordance with the divine plan. What that purpose of that plan is, neither Omar nor ourselves know, and both must content ourselves with the answer. He knows. Special Message 8. For this month, we invite you to listen to the following strains born from afar, coming from the harps of spiritual truth sounded by the trained fingers of the Hindu sages. The truth embraces all real consciousness, and in embracing all it unites the doer and the deed and the witness of the deed, the actor and the act and the witness of the act, the thinker and the thought and the thing thought of, the living and the life and the witnesses and incidents of the life. As the lamp of the theater embraces in its rays the audience, the actors, the theater, and the stage, each and all alike, in one sweep of its light, and as it continues to shed its light when all have departed from the stage and the seats, so is truth as related to the universe. The seer of thy sight thou shalt not see, the hearer of thy hearing thou shalt not hear, the thinker of thy thoughts thou shalt not think, the knower of thy knowledge thou shalt not know, nay, not until thou hast transcended these mortal things, and risen to a knowledge that thou art thy real self, in truth, all-pervading. All everything else is mortal, illusion, not, untruth. Truth is the unseen seer, the unheard hearer, the unthought thinker, the unknown knower. Besides truth there is no other seer, no other hearer, no other thinker, no other knower. Truth is that, thy real self, ever immortal, ever in being, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. All besides is mortal and unreal. Know ye one, know ye all. The all is one, the one is all. In the beginning of beginninglessness, there was but one. At the end of endlessness, There is but one, and beginning and end are one and the same, and both are not. Truth is all that is, has ever been, and ever will be. Brahma, Indra, Prajapati, and all the lesser gods, the five elements, and all that breathes or moves about, or flies above, or stands steadfast and unmoved, exist through thought, depend upon thought, are held in thought, the thought of the One. Otherwise they are not, but the One depends upon nothing, not even upon thought, for all, and thought, emanate from it. Our meditation for the coming month is, truth is ever abiding within. He who realizes this truth becomes master of his life.